Hi guys. How are we? I know. I've been gone a long time. What can I say? Some stuff happened. And, I just didn't feel like doing much of anything. Well, it's not like I've completely been doing nothing. For the past couple of months, I've been, on top of dealing with personal things, I have been completing my little book project. I shall present it to you now. This is a second edition. I actually published this book in 2015. It was a different cover, of course. I haven't got the old one lying around in arm's reach, but the old one is the two red eyes on the front cover. But yeah, I published that in about 2015, and, well, there's a short story behind why I didn't get anywhere with it, but it mostly had to do with not having the financial means to actually get it out there properly. So I just shelved it for years until I was ready to start up again. And I took the opportunity to improve on the cover, which I think this one's fantastic. And I made a couple of adjustments to the story, just fixing up things that I was never happy with in the original. And yeah, self-published on Amazon. So you should be able to find that book if you're a science fiction, I should say science fiction / fantasy lover. Because the science fiction I've put in there is technically stuff that doesn't exist. Technically. But I've got a bit of a background in physics, so I think I made it fun and believable. So check it out. It's on Amazon, Kindle and paperback, print to order. And I'm sure you'll enjoy it. As for everyone else, I'm sure you're here for a proper video on philosophy. So we're going to get straight into it, and we're going to talk about Whataboutism, the misplaced fallacy. I've been wanting to do this for ages. Alright, let's go. Alright, so we're discussing whataboutism, and that the use of this word is wrong, and I'm going to present an argument as to why its usage should be ceased immediately. I'm serious. We shouldn't be using this phrase to describe anything, nor should we be using it as any kind of argument or rebuttal. Now, before we get into that part of the video, I want to ask you all a simple question. Have you ever heard of a red herring? Yeah. Those of you who know what the red herring fallacy is might know what to expect from this episode. So now, let's take a look here. I think most people will find that the red herring fallacy and whataboutism are virtually the same in their intended meaning. I will clip the red herring fallacy here. And this is the badly phrased whataboutism. Now, if you analyze both of these fallacies, you'll see they both mean to call to fallacious reasoning where someone makes an unrelated or unreasonable comparison to the core argument being made, to distract or deflect from the argument, proposition, or criticism. In fact, even the editor of this wiki article admits that there's a correlation between the red herring fallacy and whataboutism fallacy. That's strange, isn't it? Why are there two fallacies with the same meaning? One is phrased as a metaphor, whereas the other is just bad English. That should be reason enough for people to never use the phrase whataboutism again, because it is bad English, and it does sound like it was made up by people who didn't know the red herring fallacy existed. And I suspect that's because it was. Apparently the person who coined it in the 70s was a history teacher, and then it was brought into common usage by a journalist. Even then, it wasn't used that much or well known, because a word to describe a person distracting or deflecting from a core argument being made was already in existence. The red herring. I can only assume that a new word coming into existence to describe this behavior is due to ignorance. The creators of whataboutism as a phrase noticed a pattern in their respondents' refutations and rebuttals, but didn't know how to address it. All they knew is that their detractors had a tendency to say, "What about this and what about that?" Which is not necessarily fallacious. For example, if I were to say that all swans are white, and then you said, "What about this black swan I have here?" You would be making a fair comparative refutation. I would be in the wrong to claim all swans are white, and you would be in the right to call attention to the existence of a black swan. Now, it would be fairly unreasonable of me to then dismiss your refutation by saying, "Oh, that is just a whataboutism fallacy, trying to distract from my argument that all swans are white. Go home and come talk to me when you're at my level." That is pretty childish, isn't it? But that's what's happening with this badly worded replacement for the red herring fallacy. It's being used not to call out an opponent for avoiding accountability. Instead, it's being used by the accuser to deflect from their own hypocrisy or questions and criticisms that suggest, if not prove them wrong. And I don't care if there ever has been people who used it correctly. If you know how to use it correctly, then why not use the original term? Red herring. And that's the thing about calling attention to someone committing a fallacy. Your accusation can be false, and sometimes no fallacy has been committed. So just knowing the terms used for logical missteps is not good enough. You have to take care in knowing where they are applicable. It's very important for an accusation to be accurate. The wording for whataboutism creates an excuse not to take care in throwing around such accusations. I mean, even when I'm certain that an opponent has committed a fallacy, I will phrase such an accusation as a suggestion, leaving them the opportunity to clarify or address it. If they keep doing it, well, yeah, eventually I might say I'm done with this fallacious reasoning or just end the discussion. That's another important note. This is social media. Or like in the context I'm talking about of having philosophical debates, this is social media. You can leave discussions. You're not fighting a battle to the death. And even if you're in the right and they're in the wrong, you can't expect them to process and come to terms with that in the short amount of time that passes in a single argument. As I said, in the example before about white swans, it is a perfectly fair criticism to say, "What about this black swan?" in response to someone claiming all swans are white. That is not a fallacy, and it's not distracting from the main argument. It is correcting where the core argument has gone wrong. If instead I were to say, swans can be black or white, and then you were to respond with, "Oh yeah? What about this pink flamingo?" That would in fact be distracting from the core argument with an unrelated and unjustified comparison because it's a different breed of bird. I would then be in the right to call you out as committing a red herring fallacy, and that would be the only phrase I would use to describe this fallacy. I would not say, "Whataboutism." There are two reasons why, if it hasn't been made clear already. Number one, whataboutism is an illegitimate fallacy that need not exist, as we already have a word to describe this kind of false reasoning, the red herring. Secondly, because of its poor wording, it's being misused more often than not. So I want to discourage, if not prevent, its usage because it's obvious how easy this misplaced fallacy can be picked up by anyone and used by anyone to deny that they are wrong about anything, simply because their opponent said, "What about this thing?" And yes, it is an illegitimate fallacy because, see here, the red herring fallacy has a history of usage. It was picked up slowly and maintained as intellectuals learned it and used it where applicable. The whataboutism virtually did not exist until 4 years ago and has shot through the roof because, as I said, any intellectual munchkin that doesn't know anything about philosophical debate or the age-old terms that we use can hear words like "what about" and thinks that gives them license to declare that their opponent has dropped their brain on the way to Pittsburgh. Like, this is ridiculous. You are allowed to make comparisons in a debate. You are allowed to point to concepts that are not part of the core argument but are related to it. I mean, how are we to call out an omission of truth? That requires you compare what one person said to something else they're not saying. An omission of truth is where someone is lying or being deceptive by only telling you one part of the story that's true while disregarding the rest of the information because that's inconvenient to the claim being made. For example, a little girl might say, "That boy hit me," while failing to mention that she was the one who attacked him first by kicking him in the groin, and that maybe he was just defending himself. That's a lie by omission, also known as an omission of truth. To call it out requires you mention something that's not being talked about, and therefore can be falsely interpreted as a distraction or deflection from the main issue. The phrase "whataboutism" as a dismissive argument takes advantage of such false interpretations and can be used to protect someone from being called out for lying by omission. It can also be used to dismiss a valid question to someone advancing an agenda. Say, for example, a human rights advocate stands before a committee or some such and declares that we must end female genital mutilation. It would then be perfectly fair for someone to ask, what about male genital mutilation? It is a fair question because the advocate is advancing a proposition to discriminate for one gender over another when they both suffer the same issue. Why? What's their reasoning to justify doing that? And is it fair? Is it sound? I should say, discrimination is not actually invalid, immoral, or improper just by dint of it being discrimination. It's why it's happening is the issue. In the case of this advocate, it would then be unreasonable for them to say, "I don't care for your whataboutery. We are talking about women." No, you have to justify why we should care about a proposition that has been specified to the exclusion of the whole. If you're going to talk about a human rights issue, it should be advanced for all humans that issue affects. If you're not going to do that, then what is the justification? Is it fair? Is it reasonable or sound? You should not be able to just dismiss valid questions by saying "whataboutism" and then ignore, deflect, or evade challenge. The phrase "whataboutism" is being used as a linguistic weapon to deflect from hypocrisy and exclusionary or unfair practices. It should not be used by people who want a fair exchange of information. Now, yes, I know you can technically use the red herring fallacy as a dismissive comment. You can do that with any of the fallacies. However, the wording of the red herring means it can't easily be picked up and misused. A person needs to research it or have it explained. Whataboutism, on the other hand, just requires the context that someone said, "What about this?" And then, slap, done. You have an excuse to dismiss everything they're saying, even if it's valid. That's not a reasonable way to have a discussion or debate, so I refuse to use that phrase as a rebuttal. A side note, ideally, these fallacies are just a point of reference to know what a specific kind of fallacious reasoning looks like. They're not actually supposed to be used as a name drop without explanation or context. Like, if someone commits a straw man against you, are you really just going to say, straw man, and then not comment any further? Like, where is the straw man? Where was it committed, and is your accusation accurate? Or is there just a misunderstanding that could be rectified by a clarification? Now, I know this whataboutism phrase has been popularized and lots of people are using it, including people I respect. However, I know most, well, many, if not most, have seen this phrase misused, and this misuse appears to be almost deliberate. The reason is because the origins of this word were ill-conceived, out of ignorance for an already appropriate term for what was being described. You know as well as I do that this is a problem to be addressed. So we need to correct this misplaced fallacy and, where applicable, call out the red herring. And that is just about the end of tonight's episode. Cannot believe I got through that in almost one clip. You have no idea how many times I have to re-record these videos just because I can't get over my own nervousness. Could be the coffee. I don't know. Well, looks like I have gone on for 20 minutes and I have to do a couple of edits to shorten that down, including getting rid of this nonsense. If I decide to keep it in there, it's just so you can see my creative process. So yeah, I'm going to try. I know I said this in the last video. I am going to try to make more consistent uploads. There's more than a few things that I want to talk about. And if I'm paying attention to everything correctly, it looks like things are about to get interesting in the world. So, yeah. It'll be fun. But I have to remind you again, if you're a science fiction fan, go for this. This is the start to a series of wonder. And it's going to be so much fun. I've been writing this book since I was 13. And it's had a dozen different rewrites to get it to where it is now. That's mostly because I'm entirely self-taught. And, well, yeah, you're teaching yourself over, well, at least 15 years. You're going to pick up a lot of mistakes and fix them, and you improve the way you write and improve the way scenes are described. So, yeah, it's so good. I'm very happy with it. So, I've got to show it off to the world. I get something good, I've got to show it off to people and say, hey, here's this thing. Here's this thing. You got to try this thing. It's great. So, yeah. I know enough of my babbling. I've gone on far longer than I think I can reasonably edit to make this short. And, yeah. I'll see you in the next episode. Auf Wiedersehen. Ciao. No. Ni hao is hello. And sayonara is Japanese. Get bugger off. See you whenever I see you.